Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Today we're going to be learning Maseches Beitzah, Daf Lamed Hey, and we are starting about 15 lines or so, about a quarter of the way down on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, starting with the words Ella Amar Rav Simi Bar Ashi. We'll get to that in a moment. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Mirza Hashem, this coming Sunday night, we will be having a siyum here in the Beis Medrash, and Crunch is closed on Sundays. I checked with Mark, who is the owner. He's not, but he might as well be. I checked with Mark and he said they're closed. And what we're going to do is some sandwich club. Everyone has to please pony up $15. If you're going to use Venmo, please look up my name. If you're going to use Chase QuickPay, you are welcome to do that. Chase QuickPay and Zelle is to my cell phone number. Cash in hand, check in hand, credit cards I don't accept. Otherwise, we are all good. So that's going to be for Sunday night. And this coming Monday, Mirza Hashem.
You do take cash or you don't?
Oh yeah, green cash is king, my friend. 15. Cash is king. Pay up.
You could leave it on account for the next one.
You got it. I'm not going to remember that. Okay.
I probably won't either. So.
Okay. So halachically, I just wanted to make sure I'm not being a gun up here. So, so we'll be doing that on Monday. I'll be out of town. I'm not yet sure if it's going to be live on Zoom or pre-recorded. I will probably only know day of, and I will of course keep you posted. So yesterday we learned in the name of Rav Nachman back on Lamed Daled Amud Beis. We learned in the name of Rav Nachman that Shabbos is kova'as for Meiser. What does that mean? That because of the halachic status of eating on Shabbos, the karasa the Shabbos oneg, is that if there's a food that has yet to go through the entire process of preparation, the food has yet to be brought into one's house, and re'iyas pnei habayis is one of the final steps of the gemar malacha, of the processing of a food, which therefore makes it chayav in Meiser. Rav Nachman says that by Shabbos, even if it's the case that it is not nigmar malacha, once Shabbos kicks in, so then the chiyuv Meiser kicks in, breaking one of the general rules that Meiser only applies when there is gemar malacha. So that's a problem, says the Gemara, and we'll see why momentarily. Ella, says the Gemara, 1/4 of the way down, maybe a drop more, Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, Ella Amar Rav Simi Bar Ashi, Rabbi Eliezer Ka'amris. How could you say that we're following the shita of Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer L'taime, he does have his own reason to Amar Truma Kava V'Kol Shekain Shabbos. He holds that if one were to take Truma from a food, that would be a Koveya for Meiser, and V'Kol Shekain Shabbos, all the more so Shabbos. The problem is that we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. So Rav Nachman on the previous page said that Shabbos is Kovas. His son Mar Zutra says, oh, I have a Mari Makom for my father, and it's going to be the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer the Tana. Says the Gemara, that doesn't work. We don't paskin like him. The Tanan, as the Mishnah writes, Peiros Shetarman, if you have fruits upon which you gave Truma, Ad Shelo Nigmara Malachtan, but you have yet to bring it into your house. It's prior to Re'iyas Pnei Habayis. So under those circumstances, there's a machlokes in the Tanaim. Rabbi Eliezer Oser Le'echol Mehen Arai. Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that this food cannot be eaten arai. It is already chayav in Meiser. It's tevel, and you're not allowed to eat from it, even though there's no gemar malacha. V'chachamim matirim. And we hold like the chachamim who are lenient in that case. So Rav Nachman, you're trying to make a comment that Shabbos is kovas. Your son Mar Zutra wanted to say, I have a raya l'davar, which is Rabbi Eliezer. Says the Gemara, we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. So you can't bring me this Mishnah, our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer, that he says that Shabbos is kovas. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. So therefore, says the Gemara, that's not what Mar Zutra meant. Says the Gemara, 1/3 of the way down on Lamed Hey Amud Aleph Tashma. Let's look at another part of the Mishnah, Miseifa. What does it say in the Seifa of the Mishnah that would then imply that we hold that Shabbos is kovas? V'chachamim omrim, the chachamim were of the opinion, and we hold like the chachamim, ad sheyirshom v'yomar mikan ve'ad kan. We had said that if a person wanted to eat from fruits that were drying over the course of that first night and day of Yom Tov, that if prior to Yom Tov you took some rope and you marked off the area of fruits that you wanted to eat as they were drying, then you'd be allowed to eat them the next day, no problem. So it says the Gemara, that's a sheet of the Chachamim. And we had said in our Mishnah that the context of this is that it was during Shemitah, and it was on an Erev Shabbos when you selected that fruit. So Taima, the Gemara says, the reason why in our Mishnah we're lenient is because it was the Erev Shabbos b'Shvis. We were talking about a year of Shvis, Delav bar Isurei Nihu. In that year of Shvis, there is no Chiyuv Meiser. What does that imply? We saw this same svara yesterday, Habishar Shnei Shavua, but in the remaining years of the Shemitah cycle, the non-Shemitah years, so years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we could see that if you have an Erev Shabbos in a year that isn't Shemitah, it should be Aser. My taima. Isn't that the case? Lab Mishum de Shabbos Kava. Oh, so this is where maybe Mar Zutra was trying to bring a raya for his father, for Rav Nachman. That maybe we could see from the Seifa of our Mishnah, the sheet of the Chachamim, that in order to benefit from the fruits that are drying, you have to demarcate the space of which you'd like to be you'd eat from. Let's call it a 2 foot by 2 foot space. You put pegs and ropes, whatever you do to demarcate, to indicate that you plan on eating it. And during a year where there's no Shemitah, but it's Erev Shabbos, so then Shabbos is the Kovea for Meiser. So then we have a good raya, says the Gemara Lo. We do not have a good raya. We're a little more than halfway down. Why don't we have a good raya? Because Shiny Hassam, our Mishnah is actually quite different than the Shita of Reb Nachman. Why? Kevan de Amar Mikan ve'ad kan ani ochel machar kabale. Because in that case, you made a specific indicator of what exactly you'd be eating. That's not normal. That's not a normal way for Shabbos to be the kovas. If our Mishnah wanted to teach that Shabbos is the kovas, give us a clean case where Shabbos alone entered and made a food usher. Here, you selected exactly which 10 fruits you wanted, and therefore not a raya from our Mishnah. Ihachi, says the Gemara, if that's true, that just isolating and handpicking something makes it a kviyas, then that should be true during the week also. My area Shabbos. Why did the Mishnah deal with a case of Shabbos? If simply indicating which pieces of fruit you wanted makes it a kviyah for Meiser, makes it chayiv and Meiser, afilu b'chol nami, the same should be true during the week. Says the Gemara, we learn an ancillary din from here. Why does our Mishnah speak about Shabbos? Because hakamash malan, the tevel muchan hu etzel Shabbos, that if you have tevel, food in which there is a chiyuv Meiser, so then the halacha is it's considered muchan etzel Shabbos. What does it mean that it's muchan etzel Shabbos? It means that if a person, she'im avar v'tikno, that if a person actually did give Meiser, be'isser, you're not allowed to, but if you gave Meiser on food on Shabbos, the halacha is mesukan, that we would say that it is as though it's been tithed, and you're therefore allowed to eat it. And that ends this question and answer on the Gemara, which is that we tried to say that we have a beautiful Marimakom to support Rav Nachman from our Mishnah that Mar Zutra, his son, quoted, and it turns out it's not such a good machlokas. We also, says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down, seem to have a conflict even within Rabbi Eliezer himself. How so? We know that up until now that Rabbi Eliezer, we've been saying about him that Shabbos is kovea, that once Shabbos kicks in, there's a chiyuv meiser, even if the food is not nigmar malachto, even if the food was not yet brought into your rishus. Yet we see in another Tanaic source something that's the opposite. Or minhi, the Gemara says, haya ochel be'eshkol, person's walking around and he's eating a cluster of grapes on their branches. You just have torn off a little bit. Sometimes for dessert, we'll do that. We'll take a large cluster of grapes and we'll cut small pieces, small sets of 10, 15 grapes that you can gently put on someone's plate as dessert. So, okay, so this guy's walking around with a whole cluster of grapes. It's not such a chashuva thing to do when you're walking around eating like that, but that's what he did. So he's going from out in the orchard into the chutzner, into his private property. Oh, so that's the Gemar Malacha? When you walk into your private property, that's Gemar Malacha. That means that you should be Chayiv Meiser. So what's the halacha? Can you continue eating? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yigmor, very strange. Rabbi Eliezer says you're allowed to finish eating because he says seemingly that a Chatzir is not a Gorein for Meiser. A chatzir is not kovea for meiser. Rabbi Yoshua Omer lo yigmor. Rabbi Yoshua says you're not allowed to eat. Once you walk into the chatzir, then the chiyuv meiser kicks in. There's no more achila sarai. Now here's our case where we will then see a conflict within Rabbi Eliezer himself. The case is chashcha b'leilei Shabbos. On Friday afternoon, 5 minutes before Shkia, you're walking and you're eating from a cluster of grapes. And then Shabbos kicks in. Shkia sets in. So what should we expect from Rabbi Eliezer? Well, Rabbi Eliezer says that Shabbos is kovea. And even if you are not in the category of Gemar Malachtan, even if you have yet to bring these grapes into your private rishus, the halacha should be, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is that you're not allowed to eat this food. Okay, so what does the Gemara say? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yigmor, you can continue eating. But why can you continue eating? That's a contradiction within Rabbi Eliezer. The Rabbi Eliezer we've learned about yesterday and earlier in shiur today says that Shabbos is kovea. Over here, we see that as Shabbos kicks in, he's still eating. Why are you still allowed to eat if Shabbos is kovea? He says, Yigmor, finish the food, no problem. And Rabbi Yoshua Omer lo Yigmor is dissenting opinion. So the Gemara has to answer this question. the Gemara has a very a significant error in the Girsa here. And after the words lo yigmor, it should read as follows. This is based on the Hagos V'Tzionim, and it's based on Defusim Yeshanim, on old texts of the Gemara. And the Gemara reads like this. Masnisen, how do we answer this question? Masnisen, our Mishnah is Rabbi Nasanhi, skipping a line. Rabbi Nasanhi, and what does Rabbi Nasan say? The Tanya, the Beitzah says, Rabbi Nasan Omer, Kishe Amar Rabbi Eliezer Yigmor, Bechatzer Yigmor. He doesn't mean that you should be finishing it in the field. It doesn't mean you're going in. It's as you are about to go in, finish it before you go in. That's fine. When Rabbi Eliezer says that you're allowed to finish this food, even though Shkia has set in, he doesn't mean on Shabbos mamish, elamamtin lemotze Shabbos v'yigmor. You can finish it at another time, and therefore his shita has stayed safe. We've made an ukimta. We've retranslated the way that this brisa about the eshkol, about the cluster of grapes, was brought, and there is no conflict. Rabbi Eliezer remains with his shita that Shabbos is a koveya. However, we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. And in order to make that clear, the Gemara says as follows, 6 lines from the bottom of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. Ki asa Ravin, Amar Rav Yochanan. Ravin came and said in the name of Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan said the following. Echad Shabbos, whether or not it's Shabbos, ve'echad Truma, whether or not one siphoned off Truma from Peiros, ve'echad Chatzer, whether or not one brings it into their private property, ve'echad Mekach, whether or not one does any sales with this particular fruit, Kulan, in all cases, ein koven ela b'davar shenigmar malachtan, period. The only way that food ever gets to the point of Meiser is if the Gemar Malacha is intact, is if it's been roa pnei habayis. It has to be fully done. Otherwise, it doesn't count. This is against the Rabbi Eliezer that we just saw. And now the Gemara details what Rabbi Yochanan was thinking with each piece of his statement. You can imagine the shiur being given by Rabbi Yochanan. He writes on the chalkboard and that these 5 things, Shabbos, Truma, Chatzer, Mekach, all of these things, they all require Gemar Malachtan in order to be Kovei Meiser. So it says the Gemara, what did he mean to exclude with each statement? Shabbos, well, we already know about one person, which is Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara, strangely, doesn't mention it. The Gemara says, Shabbos, what was Rabbi Yochanan trying to exclude? La'afuke mid Hillel. What do you mean, La'afuke mid Hillel? We've been talking for the last blot about Rabbi Eliezer. Why don't we say that when Rabbi Yochanan was teaching this din, it was to exclude Rabbi Eliezer? So take a look at Tosfos. The last Tosfos on the page, Dibur HaMaskal, Shabbos la'afuke mid Hillel. And the Balei Tosfos write, Ubedinhu to have a matzi leminkat la'afuke mid Rabbi Eliezer. We could have said that maybe Rav Yochanan was really trying to exclude the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. De'amar kovea afilu b'davar shel lo nigmar malachto. We could have said that, but we seemingly chose not to. Umishum hachi lo nakte. What is the reason why we did not choose him? Mishum de lo revusahu. It doesn't teach us anything halachic because de belav hachi ein halacha kamoso de shamutihu. We reject his shita outright. So therefore, back in the Gemara, we don't even need Rav Yochanan, who lived a while after Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yochanan is an Amora, Rabbi Eliezer is a Tana, and the Gemara at that point, it was already clear to everyone how we paskin. So we didn't want to say that it was to exclude Rabbi Eliezer because we don't paskin like it. So the Gemara instead says that the reason why Rabbi Yochanan says that Shabbos is not a koveya for Meiser, when it's not nigmar malachto, is la'afuke mid Hillel. What does Hillel say? The Tanya, the Beitzah writes, and here there's a correction in the Girsa as well. Ha ma'avir peiros mimakom lemakom liktos. If a person spreads out fruit all over the place on their roof, wherever it is, to dry out, and then v'kidei shalem hayom, and then the day kicks in. Rabbi Yehuda, Hillel le'atzmo oser. Hillel himself says it's forbidden, and Rabbi Yochanan wanted to exclude the sheet of Rabbi Yochanan. We don't paskin that way. Rabbi Yochanan says the only way that Shabbos is koveh is if it's nigmar malachto. And on the top of Lamed Hey Amud Beis, we move to the second factor, to the second part of Rav Yochanan's shita, that a chatzer is not kovea. Chatzer, why did Rav Yochanan say that? Who was he trying to exclude? Says the Gemara, la'afuke mid Rav Yaakov. Ditznan, what does Rav Yaakov say? Hamavir te'enim b'chatzer liktzos. If a person lays out figs in their courtyard in order to dry them out, the halacha is Banav uvnei beso ochlin mehen arai upturn min meiser. You're allowed to eat from it arai. It's not chayiv in meiser. Yeah, that's the Tanakama. The Tani Allah Rabbi Yaakov. It's actually in another brisa. There's a brisa that qualifies this Mishnah where it says Rabbi Yaakov mechayiv, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Huda poter. It says Rabbi Yaakov is mechayiv. What does that show? That shows that Rabbi Yaakov is of the opinion that just bringing something into a chatzer can make it usher, even though it was not yet roa pnei abayis, which is not what Rav Yochanan wants to teach, and that's why Rav Yochanan chose to exclude this case of chatzer to make sure that we know that we don't paskin like Rav Yaakov. What about truma? So says the Gemara, truma la'afuke mid Rabbi Eliezer. Even though it's true that we don't paskin like Rabbi Eliezer, the Balei Atosos at the bottom of the page deals with the fact that even though Rav Yochanan didn't exclude Rabbi Eliezer in the beginning of his sugya, of his shita, of his memra, he does use him here because he's the only shita out there by truma. That's not in the Mishnah writes about truma, peiros shetarman, that if in fact there were peiros that were from which truma was taken, so then and it's a case of ad shelo nigmar malachtan. So let's say the food is was not yet roa pnei abayis, and you took truma. So then the halacha is, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he says, Oser le'echol mehen arai. You're not allowed to eat that food. It's already meiser, even though it's not nigmar malachtan. The chachamim matirin, and because we paskin like the chachamim, so Rabbi Yochanan wanted to make sure that we knew that truma is not enough of a threshold in order to obligate a person in meiser. What about mekach? What about doing some type of financial transaction? So that says the Gemara Kidatanya. This is not a Mishnah; it's a brisa. It should be corrected. Let's say that you're buying figs, and you're buying them from an Am Haaretz. An Am Haaretz here is not today's version of an Am Haaretz, and this Am Haaretz is actually somewhat educated, but they were a shtickle chashud on certain halachos. We weren't totally sure about whether or not they would be ma'aser. We weren't 100% sure. So it says the Gemara, if you buy them from an Am Haaretz, but you buy them in a place, b'makom shero b'nei adam dorsin. You buy them in a place where people typically don't eat them as they are. They don't eat figs as they are. Instead, what do? They crush them to create some type of jam, some type of jelly, whatever they're going to make with it. So then what does this Mishnah, this brisa say? This Mishnah says, Ochel mehen arai. You're allowed to eat from them arai. And what's missing in the Gemara and makes this Gemara difficult is that ume'asran, when they get to the point of Gemar Malacha, and then you're obligated to be ma'aser, so then we are ma'aser demai. We're only ma'aser demai means that it's a suffix. It's a dimui. We're not sure 100% that we're chayiv in this, but we're going to do it out suffix ume'asran demai. And that is the shita we're trying to get away from, because it should only be the case that it is when it's nigmar malachta. Says the Gemara, Shmami notlas. We learn three things from this final halacha about mekach. Number one, Shmami na mekach ina kovas ela b'davar shenigmar malachta. Like Rabbi Yochanan wanted to teach that a transaction is not enough to obligate a food in meiser. That's number one, unless it's been nigmar malachta, unless it's been roa pnei abayis. Number two, v'shmami na. We're 10, 12 lines down, 6 lines before the end of the parak. By virtue of the fact that when we are me'aser, when we do give our meiser, it's done b'derech d'mai, it's done with a level of suffix. We therefore seem to assume that rov amei haaretz are me'aser. And the last thing we learn is ushma mina me'aser and d'mai me'amei haaretz afilu b'davar shlo nigmar malachto. That seemingly when we are going to be ma'aser, it would even be with something that is not nigmar malachto. This requires a lot of research and a lot of conversation, but these are the three things that are learned out from this sugya. And as well in regards to mekach, says the Gemara, what was another thing that we were trying to exclude from mekach, or that we didn't want to misunderstand? In order to exclude the following case, Rabbi Yochanan was trying to teach us that we should exclude the following. I sell apples, you sell oranges, we swap. Both of them are for eating purposes, not for crushing purposes. I'm buying dates from you, you're buying figs, figs from me, and I'm going to lay them out, and they're going to dry them out, and you're going to dry them out. Or we trade food in a way where one would then be drying them out, and the other would be eating the food. In all of those cases, says the Gemara, you're chayiv. And here it implies that mekach, just the transaction, is enough to set the wheels in motion to obligate one in meiser. And says the Gemara, Rabbi Huda Omer lechol chayiv liktos pater, that the halachos are not necessarily that way. It's only for lechol, but when it comes to drying out, it's meant to be pater. And Rabbi Yochanan wanted to preclude all of this. It's not the case. Mekach is not grounds for setting Meiser into place. I know the last blot has been a little dicey, and the short version of the Gemara is like this. There's a discussion in the Tanaim as to whether or not Meiser would kick in before all of the final steps of the processing and harvesting of food would take place. Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion, and some other Tanaim were as well, that Meiser could kick in earlier than the completion of all of the harvesting. That is not how we paskin in halacha. We paskin in halacha like Rav Yochanan, because Rav Yochanan, he's the posek acharon, he's the one who is after all of these amoraim, and we hold in halacha that Meiser never kicks in before Gemar Malachtan. This is especially true in an agricultural space where people actually do harvest. And there are some halachos, in some cases d'oraisa, in some cases d'rabbanan, depending on exactly what feature we're talking about. Nevertheless, what basically we have concluded here is like Rav Yochanan, is that in order for something to be chayiv and meiser properly, there must be a gemar malachta. I'm wondering if halachically that would be the same way as the paycheck company saying, I already issued you the money, it's on the way, but it hasn't cleared the bank yet. So like this would be the comparison in Meiser. I'm not making a halachic determination, but if we were to say that the paycheck company clicking submit is like part of the harvesting, but it hasn't landed in the account yet, am I chayiv in Meiser? When am I chayiv in Meiser? When the paycheck company clicks submit or when it lands in my bank account? So that, in theory, it's a theoretical construct, could be the difference between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Eliezer would say, you're chayiv. It's okay, it didn't land in your bank account yet, but we don't care about Gemar Malachtan. B'Sha'en Kain, according to Rabbi Yochanan and the other Tanaim that support him, is that when it lands in your house, you're done. When it lands in your bank account, then you're chayiv meiser. So just a conceptual way to look at this. Hadron Alacha, maybe Baruch Hashem, we finished the fourth parak of Maseches Beitzah. Yiratzon, we should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Let's start the next parak. This page is easy. The rest of the day is easy. It's a much easier Mishnah, and we'll have plenty of time. It's much more words, but it'll move much more quickly. The new parak opens, parak Meshilin. Meshilin peros derech aruba v'yom tov avalo b'Shabbos. If one has fruits on their roof, they are allowed to lower them if it starts to rain, whatever the case is. You're drying things out on the roof. You can lower them through the aruba, through a skylight on Yom Tov, but you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. You're allowed to cover fruits with a kli to prevent water from getting on them. If in fact you have barrels of wine or oil that are open, you can also cover them with a kli, no problem. You are also allowed to place the garbage can under the leaking roof. Hopefully no one will ever have that experience, but should we ever have such an experience, you're allowed to place the garbage can underneath that, no problem. That brings us to the Gemara, 3 lines into the new parak, halfway down on the page. Itmar of Yehuda v'Rav Nasan. What we're going to be talking about for the next 20 lines is the first word in the parak of Meshilin. There are 10 different versions of this word. So it says the Gemara, Chad Tani Meshilin, V'chad Tani Mashchilin, different words. They mean the same thing of lowering fruit down. Amar Mar Zutra, Man de Tani Meshilin lo mishtabesh. The way that we have it, where it says Meshilin lo mishtabesh, there was no error. Uman de Tani Mashchilin lo mishtabesh. And even according to the one who says Mashchilin, which is a slightly different language, that is also not a problem. How do we know? Let's support each of these two versions. Mandatani mashilin lo mishtabesh. According to the way we have it as mashilin, we have a pasuk for this. Techsiv ki shal zeisecha, when your zeisim will be taken down, which means to lower, which is what our Mishnah is talking about, lowering food through the aruba. And uman detani mashchilin lo mishtabesh, the one who says that the word in the parak should not be mashilin but should be mashchilin, he has a marimakum as well. That's non hashachul ve'akasul. These are two different types of psulin. We'll discuss in a moment what they are. Shachul, what is the case of shachul? Shachul is nishmeta yurecho. The hip is disconnected. Mashchilin, the hip has lowered. It's fallen out of its socket, just like you are allowed to lower fruit. And as well, ksul, what is that psul? Sha'achas miarkosav givoa michaverta, where the animal has a deformity, where one hip is larger than the other. These are considered psulim in an animal that is a bechor, not with every korban, just with certain korbanos. And Amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak, forget that. Mandatani mashirin lo mishtabesh. The language of Mashirin is different already. That's not a problem. Umandatani mashchirin, that's our fourth language. That's also not a problem. Umandatani manshirin, also lo mishtabesh. And let's go through all of these 3. We have a total now of 5 languages that our Mishnah could have had. And we are 2/3 of the way down, about halfway through the thickness of this new section. Mandatani mashirin lo mishtabesh. The one who says mashirin, they didn't make an error. What's the marimakum that indicates mashirin means to have something lowered? A little difficult. It requires a little bit of poetic license to get from here to there, but the Gemara says that it's not based on a Mishnah. Rabbi Shmuel Omer Nazir lo yachof rosho ba'adama mibnei shemashires haseir. A Nazir is not allowed to use certain types of earth on his head because it may pull out some of his hairs, and when you pull out your hairs, they fall. So that's going to make your hair fall off. And therefore, just like our Mishnah is talking about Meshilin Peros Derech Aruba, we could replace the word with Meshirin, which means to make the hair fall. What about the third or fourth option? I think this is the fourth option we're up to. Uman Detani Mashchirin, what does that mean? Lo Mishtabesh. That's also not an error. That also could work in our Mishnah. Ditnan HaShachur, which refers to a razor, the Hazug Shel Saparim. And this is the pair of saparim. The pair is scissors. It's two pieces that connect together to cut hair. The technology is pretty old. And this is from a Mishnah. So we know that this is a 2,000-year-old technology at the least. Scissors. The halacha is that when it comes to scissors, even if you take them apart, we know that some scissors, you can take them apart. They have like a hole on one, they have a protrusion on one side and kind of like an eyelet on the other, and you can connect a pair of scissors. And the halacha is that even if you separate them, they are still considered to be a kli because each one can be used to shave someone. It's halachically problematic, but it does function as a kli, so they're tmein. So we see that the shachor is a razor, and that makes your hair fall off, and therefore that also is fitting for our Mishnah. Umandatani manshirin, the one who says manshirin, also lo mishtabesh. What's his language? Ditnan misha nashru kelev b'mayim. If his clothing fell into nashru, if they fell into the water, you can wear wet clothes on Yom Tov, and that's not a problem. I know someone who, this happened to be during the week, but it's just a bit of a comedic story. They went to tovel something in the Kalim mikveh here on Tui, and they dropped something in, and they quickly reached in to grab it, and their feet slipped, and they went headfirst into the Kalim mikveh, feet flailing up in the air, gargling water. It's a little bit of a funny story. I hope the camera was running, and I hope that they made a couple of bucks off of him. So the Gemara says that if a person's clothes are sopping wet, normally we have some concerns about this midrabanan. Like we know that if you come home from Shabbos and your clothes are sopping wet, you're not allowed to hang them in the bathroom or in the laundry room. That's an Isser Derabanan. It looks like you did. We know you didn't, but that's the Xeris Chachamim because that's how laundry was done back in the day. But here we're not concerned. If your clothes are saturated with water, you can still wear them. We're not choshesh. People will assume that of you. Inami, another use of the word manshirin is mehad etznan ezu leket hanoshe b'shas ksira. Leket, of course, leket shicha and peya. We know from Maseches peya that it's hanoshe b'shas ksira, that when the farmer would be harvesting and he drops something in the field, he's not allowed to go back and pick it up. So that's leket, and that we are supposed to leave for the anim. Anyways, all of these various languages are considered acceptable in our Mishnah. The one we have is Meshilin, but there are 5 options, all of which are acceptable. The Gemara at the 2 dots, 3/4 of the way down, 10 lines up, says as follows. We had learned in our Mishnah, Tanan Meshilin Peros Derech Aruba B'Yom Tov. Ad Kama, is there an upper limit as to how much we are allowed to carry? Because we know what we've learned already in this Masechta, we're concerned about tircha at times. What's considered to be too much? So it says the Gemara, Ad Kama, Amar Rab Zera, Amar Rab Asi, V'Amar Amar Rab Asi, Amar Rab Yochanan, Ke'osa Sheshaninu. The halacha here by Yom Tov is the same as we would have assumed by Shabbos in a slightly different context. Mifan and Arba v'Chamesh Kupos Shel Teben. I remember learning this sugya because they were setting up a place to have shiur. So that's what the Gemara says over there in the Maseches Shabbos. Mefanin, you would be able to move or clean up 4 to 5 bales of hay, of straw, b'shel tefua, mibnei ha'orchim, if there are guests. That's not considered too much of a tircha, mibnei bittul beis hamedrash. But the Gemara from here to the bottom of the page registers problem after problem with this comparison of a Gemara that relates to Hilchos Shabbos and applying it back to the world of Yom Tov. Yeah, that's oil and water sometimes. It's not so simple to always compare the two. Tircha is different. There's a lot that's very different. Says the Gemara, maybe the case over there is different because the Ika Bittul Beis HaMedrash, the case in Maseches Shabbos was dealing with Bittul Torah. Maybe if that's your Mari Makom, then maybe we can't apply it at all over here to say that you can carry a similar amount. Inami, another problem is, says the Gemara 4 lines from the bottom, Hasam Hainu Taima de Arba V'Chamesh Kupos Shari Mishum Shabbos de Chamira V'Lo Asi L'Zilzule. Maybe on Shabbos, where the punishments of violating halacha are so severe, we allow you to move 4 or 5 bales of hay or straw because the halachos are so strict and stringent that we're not concerned about you doing something that would really be usher. However, aval Yom Tov dekil ve'asi l'zilzule be Yom Tov, which is more mekel, and people typically are more likely to make errors. Klal lo. Maybe we can't learn from that Mishnah back to our case of Yom Tov. Inami le'idach gisa. We could also have a problem in the reverse direction, not asking from Shabbos to Yom Tov, but from Yom Tov to Shabbos. Over there, by Shabbos, there was no hefsid mammon. By Yom Tov, the hefsid mammon afilu tuvanami. Over there, in the case of Maseches Shabbos, you were allowed to move things, but there was no hefsid. But here, there's a hefsid. You're going to lose so much. It's starting to rain. You've been drying this out for 5 weeks. It's the first time it rained. You're going to lose a lot of produce, and that's not right. So maybe we should say that the 4 and 5 is only under certain circumstances. So afilu tuvanami and Yom Tov, you should be able to move more. So tomorrow we'll stop at the very top of Lamed Vav and Aleph to continue this. So we're pausing here because there's no good stopping point. Wishing you all a beautiful night.